Steve here again from Propeller Warehouse, home of Genesis propellers, Genesis stainless steel propellers. And we're going to talk about, or this episode is episode 4, talking about the group of propellers that suit the 70 to 140 horsepower range. And because it's such a diverse range, the best way to handle this would be that in episode 4, we're going to break it into the different brands of outboards, such as Yamaha, Suzuki, Honda, Tohatsu, etc. So to begin with this group of propellers, there's a lot of controversy as to how propellers are actually selected for certain engines for certain boats. And I'd like to explain how propeller companies try to do this for their customers. So as I say, it's a very diverse range of boats out there that will run 70 through to 140 horsepower. Those gearboxes on the 70 to 140s are 4¼ inch gear case. They're 13 and 15 spline, but the 90% of the majority is 15 spline. And you've got to ask yourself the question, if you've got a gearbox has only got 70 horsepower power head, what sort of differences in propellers would you have if you've got 140 horsepower? Because that's obviously double the horsepower. And the answer to that question is you need to have a range of different blade geometries in the same pitch to be able to do that. So the most common sizes sold around the world in that grouping is definitely 13¼ by 17, 13¼ diameter, 17 pitch, and that's fine if you put that propeller in that sort of blade area. That's this type of prop here, the Yamaha cleaver type K series it's called, small blade area, so they come in a 13¼ diameter. But if you've got 140 horsepower, then how are you going to deliver that extra double that horsepower into the water? And the answer to that is by having larger blade areas. So if the manufacturer can supply a propeller with a lot bigger blades in square inches, and you can only imagine lines drawn here, cross-hatch into square inches, you might have, say, 50 square inches. Well, that might be fine for a 70 horsepower, but for 140 horsepower, you're going to need more blade area. And that's called DAR. It's the diameter and area ratio formula. So most propeller companies, ours in particular, try to give more than one type of blade shape for a particular group, for a particular type of boat. And that's where the real art comes in of selecting the right propeller for a boat. And that's why you need to fill in the expert analysis form on our website so that we get to know what boat you have, if it's beamy for its length or the weight of the boat, things of that nature, to then select the right blade area in that particular prop group. So this size here, for example, I think you can see that pretty clearly in blade area. That's ideal for a 70-80 horsepower Suzuki or a Yamaha, even a Honda in the lower horsepower group. And in the same pitch, if you've got a 115 or a 140, you go to larger blades. Same pitch, but larger blade area. And that's what carries that boat far better, because you've got more horsepower to deliver more thrust to make the whole boat application work well. So some of the prop pitches that are available in this diverse group of 70 to 140 horsepower is 9 pitch, generally something big diameter, 14 by 9. Obviously that's going to go onto a houseboat or a pontoon boat, something of that nature. 11s, 12s, 13s. Some of these, you know, there are Bigfoot engines in the Mercury and Yamaha range, so Obviously you have to go quite a low pitch because you've got low horsepower, but you've got a big gearbox. And these are all the specific important information that prop company needs to know to give you the right selection. Not always marine dealers have the answers for this. That's why they ring companies like ours and actually get the good oil first so that they can then go back to the customer. So now that we realise that in a, say for example, a 13.25 by 17, there are 2 or 3 different blade geometries and you can mix and match. There's also a 4-blade application. And generally speaking, we don't like to supply 4-blade propellers for the lower end of the horsepower groupings in those 70s, 80s, 90s, unless it's on a barge or it's a you know, not a recreational boat that is there to serve many purposes, from fishing, family, water skiing, the whole lot. But definitely the 115 horsepower to 140 horsepower, even the hundreds in the Yamaha, in the Suzukis, and in a lot of the Hondas can swing a 4-blade propeller. These are called Torque Masters. I coined the name, of course, and they're available in 15, 17, 19 and 21 pitch. Totally affordable these days because the production of propellers has improved out of sight with robotics. Our factory runs 24/7, and meaning that there's it's a lot more cost effective in the Genesis range than you'll find a lot of other brands are. That's one important thing, for you to realise. The cost, it's always been a very labour intensive business of investment casting, using foreign workers, whether in different countries of Thailand or Taiwan or places like that, Filipino and Thai workers. Now the robots are actually doing the work, the dirty work, the hard work and the dangerous work. So that's one of the reasons why our propellers are actually something like 25% cheaper than anything else on the market. So go to our website to have a look, you'll see what I'm talking about. So because this range of propellers, horsepower group 70 to 140 is so diverse, it's better that I break up the episodes into 5 subgroups and of Yamaha, Mercury, Tohatsu and Suzuki, and I'll just continue on with the first group, which is Yamaha. F60s, 60 horsepower, 60 and 70s, similar engines, not a lot of price difference in the Australian market. The 70 was born out of Yamaha motorcycle racing, 24 valve. They developed most of their horsepower up at the high end of the rev range, around 6.2, to get that 70 horsepower. It's an engine that I would never put a 4-blader on because you would never get the benefits of a 4-blader on that engine. That's probably one of the most difficult Yamaha engines to prop and to get it right and to get them up into that rev range. Because of that, we often will sell 13 pitch, so 13.75 by 13, 13 and a half by 14, and sometimes 15s. Obviously the 13 pitches, the lower pitches, your boat speeds aren't that good. They're generally around that 50k, 55k. You might have a Minn Kota on the front, a few more extra heavy batteries, and you might be a big bloke. So the F70, in my view, is a little bit lackluster. The 80s tend to improve on that. With the 90s, you start to really see the power to weight ratio improve, your boat speeds improve, and of course, with a 70, we would have put on this type of propeller, which is a Stella. And then when you go to the 90s, you go to the bigger blade area, which is a Stella Plus. Plus just means there's extra blade area. So when you go through the range from 70 through to 130 horsepower, obviously 115s are very popular and so are 130s. Those engines like four-blade propellers. There's no doubt about it. They've got the cubics to be able to get the benefits of that four-blader into the water and produce the thrust. So long distances, you'd run a three-blade where top end speed was all important. And a four-blade if you're carrying three people doing a spot of game fishing or just bottom bashing or pulling up even skiers and kids as a recreational pursuit. It's interesting to note that the gear ratios on all of these engines, the F70s all the way through to the 130s, are all around that 2.33 to 1 ratio. That basically means that if you're doing 6,000 revs and you divide by 2.33, there's your propeller revs. That's how it works. 1 to 1 is 6,000 revs, but there's no outboards with 1 to 1. In a future podcast, I'm going to sort of throw out there into the never internet world an electric fishing reel that I possess, which has a 2 to 1 gear ratio in it. It's an electronic mere epoch reel. It's one of the few electronic reels to have a variable gear ratio. And wouldn't it be awesome if that technology ever came into an outboard gearbox to be able to get the benefits of a gear ratio change? And I would say in the future that sort of thing is coming, will happen, because the Japanese can already do it in a fishing reel. It'll probably be on the future outboard range. So I just thought I'd throw that out there with you. The other things that you could say about this grouping of horsepower engines in the Yamaha is, even in Mercury and Honda and Suzuki and Tohatsu, the gear ratios are pretty similar in all that 70 to 140 horsepower group. The rules change when it comes to Suzuki's in the DF 70 through to 140s, because their ratios are much higher, and pretty much the Suzuki Marine walked out of the box from traditional gear ratio to pitch to horsepower philosophy. So it is a philosophy from Suzuki. It's actually turned out to be pretty good, I think. I remember when the first Suzukis were offered at the Miami Boat Show, and there was a lot of hoo-ha as to the size of the propellers. But we'll cross that when we get to episode 4, Suzuki. So the expert analysis form is all important on the website for us to decide which blade area is needed and for what pitch. Thank you for listening to this Yamaha episode. That's probably all for now, and we'll see you soon. Okay, welcome back to episode 4. This time we're talking Mercury in the 75 to 140 horsepower type group. Again, it's a 4¼ inch gear case, it's 15 splines, and as I've mentioned before in the previous Yamaha episode 4, blade area is all important. You can get 2 or 3 different propellers, all the same diameter, all the same pitch, but in different blade area. So obviously the larger blade areas, like this type of blade here, is more suited to the higher horsepower group, say for 120 or a 140. Whereas if you are running a 75 or even a 60 Bigfoot or the new Command series, you need still a certain pitch to keep the revs happy on the engine, but you go down in blade area. That is really how propeller companies tend to try to get it right for your boat. So filling out the expert analysis form on our website, www.propellerwarehouse.com.au, is the answer, and somebody like me on the other side will be saying, okay, you've got that particular type of boat. We've done those before. Right, so you're fishing, you're water skiing, you're doing this, doing that. So you need this particular type of propeller. And that's how we do it, from years of experience. So with the Mercury, we're doing, what are we doing Mercury? We're doing, so the pitches available for Mercury in the Bigfoot gearbox are, again, 14 by 19, 9-inch pitch for houseboats, for very heavy applications. We do 10, 11, 13, 15. The most common sizes would definitely be 15 pitch for that lower horsepower group on the command thrusts. So you've got a big gearbox, but you've got not a lot of horsepower. And 13.25 by 17 again would have to be the most sold propeller pretty much around the world in that grouping. The gear ratios on all your Mercs tend to, I better be careful what I say here. Mercs tend to run a lot smaller or faster gear ratios, and they tend to have larger displacement engines. So when you buy a 140 horsepower Mercury, I wonder if it really is 140. It might be 150, could be 160. I don't know, there's no rules on that. But I know they used to do that. So in the early days, going back on a bit of history in the 70s, when Yamaha and other Japanese companies were infiltrating the American market, the Mercs always used to go faster than any of the Japanese brands coming in. And that's because, well, the Japanese were making those engines of 90 horsepower, for example, right on, smack on 90 horsepower at 6,000 revs, or in a two-stroke, 5,500. Whereas the Mercuries, well, they seem to have a lot more power, but they were badged 90 horsepower, but they seem to have 115 horsepower. So there is no law that says you can't overrate your engine, but there is a law embedded that basically says if you state it's 90 horsepower, it must make 90 horsepower, but it can't be under 90 horsepower. So you can make your own conclusions from what I've just said then. We can offer propellers even up to 23 pitch in this grouping, which is pretty tall. So obviously that sort of thing will be going on to, you know, a bass boat, a skeeter, something light, not so big, long and narrow. Always is going to find you the boat speed. And Mercuries have brought out a big range, which we'll be talking about in the future, on their Sea Pro range, which are big gearboxes, high rake propellers, big diameters because they've got the torque. In the group that we're talking now, the 70 to 130, 140 type horsepower, very standard to see 18 pitch, 19 pitch Vengeances and things of that nature. There is a big range of aftermarket propellers that cover the needs of all of the Mercury range, and dare I say it, way, way cheaper. One thing to always remember with our Genesis range is we have a spiral flute to look after the exhaust on either 2 strokes and 4 strokes. As the prop turns, it helps to extract the exhaust gases, which is a bit of a unique situation. Of course, all our props will interchange too. We have a interchangeable hub, and that would mean that even if you owned a Yamaha and you moved to a Honda, you could take your prop with you, and all you need to do is just get another thrust washer and spacer from us. So the diversity of engines that are available in that 4 1/4 gear case is pretty big. It covers a lot of different boats. So that's why we have so many different types of propeller in a particular pitch that is suitable for that particular boat application. And that's the important thing I wanted to stress, because pretty much there's been always a lot of controversy about how to deliver that horsepower, that extra horsepower, out of the same gearbox. So thank you for listening to my Mercury presentation, and we'll continue on with some other brands, and I think what we'll do is attack Suzuki next. Hi, it's Steve back again from Propeller Warehouse. We're talking today about the Group D propellers, and this is episode 4, but specifically talking about Suzuki propellers or Suzuki outboard marine and their propeller range. And something I'd like to try to clear up in this very diverse range of engines, which suits an incredible range of boats, basically from 4.75 to 6 metre boats. And that thing I want to clear up is that something is very misunderstood by a lot of engine resellers and marine dealers, and that is how to select the right blade area. Not the right diameter and pitch, but the right blade area for a particular boat, a particular customer, and the application he's using that boat for. So in the group of propellers, 70 to 140, which we call D group, it's a 4¼ inch gear case, it's 15 spline. Most of the Suzukis are 15 spline in that group, except for the early DF70. When it became the DF70A, a few years later, it went to 15 spline, but the DF70 is 13 spline, and very, very similar to OMC. OMC also run 13 spline in that horsepower category. In fact, there was always a tie-up between Suzuki, Japan and OMC. There was a lot of sharing. Some of the first OMC 4-strokes that came out in Australia were a white Suzuki, and they were running a Johnson propeller, making it all the more confusing for people like us. But anyway, so the big misunderstanding is making sure that if you're got a smaller horsepower group, 4¼ like a 70, an 80 or a 90 Suzy, you need to run the smaller blade area, diameter and pitch, whatever it is, 13¼ by 17, something of that nature. Most of the Suzukis, OEM, propellers, all run 14 diameter. So in the 70s, we've found it's not always the best propeller. You can put a Yamaha propeller on some of those 70s, and it actually works incredibly well because it's got the smaller blade area. But generally speaking, all of the Suzuki range, 70 through to 140, all share a 2.59 to 1 ratio. And unlike every other propeller manufacturer who run different diameters for different pitches, Suzuki tend to run the same diameter for every pitch. So it goes 1415, 1417, 1419, 1419's got to be the fastest selling prop in this country, 1421 and 1423, all on a 2.59 to 1 ratio. So the Suzuki philosophy, when they developed the offset gears under the power head and decided to run with a philosophy of lower prop speed and larger diameters and higher pitches, it set itself apart from all of the other manufacturers. So you got to say, well, is that engine sort of better suited to some boats? And the answer to that is yes, but I'm not going to get into that little messy pile. My job is to explain to you how we select a particular blade shape, and at Propeller Warehouse we have the Genesis stainless steel range, and we can offer 3 blade in a Stellar, in the smaller blade area, 3-blade Stella in the Stella Plus in the larger blade area and 3-blade, and of course 4-bladers, which have been incredibly successful on all your 115s and 140s. So the other important thing that's happened in manufacturing propellers in the last 3 years is the advent of not just robotics in the manufacturing process, but in high-strength aluminium, which is really an aviation grade. They're a lot more durable. They are stated to be around 5 times more durable. So you can get aluminium 4-blade propellers for your Suzuki 140 as low as $250. We make them in all of the OEM sizes, as I said before, 1417, 1419s, 1421s. The OEM propeller blade geometry was always a very good performer. So why change something that is that good? We've just made a better quality product at a cheaper price. Another thing about Suzuki outboards in that D group is that their gear case is very slimline. That means that the skeg is quite small, and in actual fact all of the blade tips on a Suzuki propeller, including ours, original equipment, ours and every other brand, is sitting lower than the skeg. So if you're running through a bit of sand, you're actually running your blade tips through. So we've developed a few years back what's called a prop saver. It is like a sleeve made of ABS PP, so it's a lot stronger than normal plastic, that epoxies straight onto your skeg and gives you around 2 to 3 inches more depth under the skeg. So most of the other brands all utilise a skeg that is 2 to 3 inches below the diameter of the blade tips of the prop. So if you're heading up north, if you're in sandy areas, if you're just really wanting to save a bit of damage, buy one of these little babies. We put them on eBay. They're about $79, and this fits every outboard, every Suzuki outboard from 70 through to 140 horsepower. Hi there, it's Steve back again from Propeller Warehouse to present to you our 4th edition of both Honda and Tohatsu outboards together. I'll start with the Honda range first. The group is 60 Honda with the larger gear case all the way through to the 100 horsepower Honda these days. Of course, the old, we call that a D group. They're a 4¼ inch gear case. They're 15 spline. And in the old days, when I say the old days, maybe going back 10, 15 years, the 115, the old Honda Accord motor, was there in the Honda 130. They came into that same gearbox grouping under 115 and 130. But today the 115 and 130s are the larger 4¾ inch gear case. So the range of pitches available for Hondas in that horsepower group, pretty much 60 through to 140, is all the way from 9 pitch, 14 by 9, all the way through to 14 by 21. You don't really sell too many 21 pitches for Hondas because they're generally not known as an engine you would see on a bass boat or on a circuit racing or anything of that nature. They're generally recreational boats. 17s are very, very popular. We offer obviously the Genesis stainless steel range with the spiral hub, interchangeable hub, and in 15s and 17s. The gear ratios on the Hondas are very, very conservative, somewhat similar and robust in design to Mercury, for example. And the the most important thing is always to select the correct blade area for a particular diameter and pitch. So again, you say to yourself, you know, what's the difference between a BF 90 and a BF 100? And if it's on a heavier boat, well, obviously you'd go to the larger blade area in the correct pitch. So as I've said before in previous selection of engines, the most important thing is, and it's very misunderstood by a lot of dealers, is to select the right blade area for a particular boat. We offer the smaller blade area for the smaller horsepowers, and they're called a Stellar. And then for the higher horsepower grouping, and in a lot of cases, you know, on a bigger boat carrying a few more people, you would go for the Stellar Plus. So that's one of the important things to recognise. There's also high strength aluminium, 5 times stronger than normal aluminium. It's an aerospace type technology or casting, much more durable, very affordable, and they can be, the 4-bladers could be used on the 100 more so than a 75, for example. So selecting the right blade area is all important, and that's why we prefer you always to fill out the expert analysis form on the website so we can get a handle on the type of boat that you've got, the engine that you've got, and then what the application for that boat is. So that's all important. Then we can narrow it down and offer you the best price in the country. So Honda's very conservative, robust. I've personally had Hondas all my life. I think I'm up to about number 10 Honda these days. It's just personal preference, and I've never actually had a problem. I've had a few things myself. I've lent my boat out to a few people, and they've bent the props, but that's life, and this is a pretty good representation of what's available. 4-blade aluminium, 3-blade aluminium, and then there's 3 or 4 different choices of blade geometries that can interchange even into other engines. That's one of the features of our range of propellers, the Genesis range, is that you can simply shift take your propeller from your Honda and we can make it fit a Suzuki or a Mercury or a Yamaha or even a Tohatsu for that matter. Tohatsu is very well known for their smaller range of outboards being incredibly robust, originally designed for military, swiftwater, rescue type situations, which is why they pretty much dominate the surf life saving and those sort of rescue areas and what have you. Tohatsu have released only recently a new MFS 115 and a 140 with some pretty clever technology all based around tuned exhausts. And anyone who knows anything about motorcycle racing and the advent of, you know, from 2 strokes through to 4 strokes and delivering horsepower, tuning the exhaust is all important. I've been very impressed with the new 115s and 140s, having propped quite a few boats up and down the East Coast. In my view, that motor has they've got a philosophy now where the torque curve is very similar to a diesel. So if I had to say of any outboard engine out there in the market that is got some serious grunt down low for commercial applications especially, it would have to be that particular Tohatsu 115 and 140, the new model. So in propping those engines, I've always selected the big blade area prop because, again, blade area does matter. And if you're pushing a heavy boat and you've got a lot of grunt down low, in other words, the torque curve is all quite steep at the lower end of the rev range, then a 4-blade or a 3-blade is a very, very good choice for those engines. You're never going to get the boat speed that a Mercury could offer because of what I've said, I guess, before or alluded to in episode 4 on Mercury. But at the end of the day, speed isn't everything. So Tohatsu have now really entered into that 4¼ inch gear case with some gusto, I would suggest, and there's going to be a lot more sold around the world, I would say. So that concludes our degrouping of all the brands which I've mentioned: Yamaha, Mercury, Honda, Tohatsu and Suzuki. Stay tuned for episode 5, which will be talking the E-Group 4¾ inch gear case in the bigger horsepower groupings from 150 through to 300. Probably it'll be broken up into the different brands again to offer a little bit more clarity. There's quite a few options in propellers in that group, so stay tuned for that group.